Hi, I'm Ben Stiller, and you're listening to the Pantheon Network.
Hey, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Season 6, Episode 33, really, of Music is Not a Genre, MxG. I think I have to rotate my hands a little more to see it better, but hand gestures, love it. Thank you as always for watching and listening. Go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre. If you are listening, you can see me on video and my wonderful backdrop, helping put together with help from my wife, Catherine. Watchers, if you're tired of my face, go to nickdimatteo.com/musicisnotagenre. Pick your streaming service. You can just listen. I'm still raising funds for Season 7. Patreon.com/musicisnotagenre, where you get all the bonus fun stuff and can participate in something upcoming, which I'll mention soon. You can join for as little as $1 a month right now, and that makes a difference. It does. And GoFundMe is the other option if you would like to help out in that way. What I alluded to, July 25th, I've been mentioning it a lot. Probably coming soon based on when this is released. In the next couple of weeks, maybe? I don't know. I don't have my schedule in front of me. But I will say that that is a live recording of an episode. My next catch-up episode where I fan comments, stuff like that, and I want you to be a part of it. Please put July 25th on your calendar. I haven't decided who's getting that Zoom link yet. My Patreon people are. That Music is Not a Genre, so please go there and you automatically get the Zoom link. Otherwise, maybe, I don't know, I'll figure it out. But I will make sure that there is a way that you can participate. Let's get to the topic. What's an album and why? Part 6.2, the 2000s, continuing the chaos. So second half of the 2000s, first of all, I started breaking up these decades in the 1980s. 80s because I knew so much about it. 90s because I knew so much about it as big decade. And the 2000s, I know quite a bit about it, but it's the amount of music that made it impossible to do this in 1 week. And I have to say that Continuing the Chaos is a great subtitle because it's exhausting and it feels chaotic. And the way music was released and consumed in the 2000s was absolutely chaotic. And the changes that happened in the 2000s, absolutely chaotic. The chaos that was set off in the first half of the decade just kept going everywhere in every direction with no clear path forward. And people may have thought there was a path, but it wasn't. It was in many ways the death throes of the pre-internet culture, desperately clinging to the world before while the new world was already there and slowly crushing it year after year. Whether you were a hanger-on or an early adopter, you knew things weren't the same, and you had a sense that they never would be. And that's why I argue that even though people often say the 90s was the last decade of the old world, yeah, but no. I really think that the last gasps of the old world, the pre-digital world, were the 2000s. And in fact, I know that for a fact. And I think that this episode will show you that in particular. I'm picking up 2005, of course, because I ended in 2004 last week. The first half was sneaky and shifty, and this half is worse. I've been saying that, and it's true. Album sales themselves peaked and then became super freaking negligible. So that I mentioned that in the first episode, and it's true. This is when it started to decline. The album as viable art was not ready for the changes. People tried all kinds of things to keep it alive: video albums, interactive albums, all this digital, exclusive digital downloads on their websites and things like that. Box sets that were collectibles, which still does work to a degree, collector's editions, things like that. But it was all for naught, really, in the end. The next age of singles, and why I say next is because, like the 1950s and prior, when singles were dominant, through at least the mid-1960s, they were dominant over and above albums. The culture that we've lived in the last at least 15 years is a singles culture. That may be, who knows? It'll change at some point because it always does. But by 2006, single downloads outnumbered albums. So that was kind of that. The age of the album was, about 30 years, I guess you could say. which is quite ironic for reasons you'll see when we get to 2006. I mentioned 2001 as being a huge freaking year for music, one of the best in history. 2006 has a slightly different distinction, and you're gonna hear that very soon. Album sales from 2000 to 2010 would be cut in half. Cut in half in 10 years. Yikes. And that's the bonus MxTRA video, as a matter of fact. The difference between singles and albums, it is, did the singles culture destroy music? A compelling title, huh? So patreon.com/music is not a genre. I do a bonus MxTRA video every week for every main episode. And this one is on how did singles influence music in general, not just albums. I think you're going to like it. So go over to Patreon, check it out. So in the late 2000s, electronic music ballooned, and by the 2010s had taken over completely, really. Hip-hop continued to enlarge the dominance it had gained since the late 1990s, and diversity ruled even more than the 90s. And even though I talked about it being an amazing thing in the 90s, it was even more so in the 2000s and more so in the 2010s and 2020s, with more non-US pop acts breaking through, which was, again, just a sign of things to come. So a lot of chaos that only barely settled by the 2010s, frankly. But it did. It did. The 2010s, I don't think, were as chaotic a decade as the 2000s, musically speaking. Usual format here, year by year, with the top of the charts, notable debuts and other notable releases, some conclusions, of course, featured song, and questions. My sources are the same: Wikipedia, Digital Dream Door, albumoftheyear.org, Rate Your Music. Same disclaimers. I'm going to miss things. I'm going to deliberately leave out things. I will be biased to an extent, both in what I leave in and out, but I'll do my best to be as inclusive as possible. Let's get right to 2005 as you listen to me audibly drink. How was that? Cartoon sounds. Jumping right into the chaos in 2005, we have a year with even more number one albums than the year before, 36. The most so far, but I'm sorry, still not the top ever. It does get worse. Just an absolute mess. When there are this many number one albums, it on the plus side, a lot of variety. So it's catering to a lot of people, which is a very, very good thing. And in fact, the 2000s continued to grow to the diversity of the 1990s. It's something we should kind of envy. Some older acts had huge comebacks, a general sense of putting it more insouciance and humor back into music, which was something that we desperately needed by 2005, especially the sincerity of 2004 was getting a little heavy-handed, especially regarding band names and album names. So kind of an interesting side there. The downside, though, of that mess is that it's showing that there is a confusion about the direction of music or what, and in the sense that we don't share things as a culture the way we used to. Now, the part of the reason of that is because what we called culture back then was white culture, maybe, or at least, a certain sense of the dominant people in culture. And so it's unfair to say that back then we all shared the same stuff, but to a degree, because of the way the machine was set up, record companies, radio stations, etc., we did share a lot more collectively than we do now. You can make the case for people like Taylor Swift and some other people. I think that's true to an extent, but maybe not as much as people wish it was. Top albums of 2005. Now, that's what I call music. Number 19 and 20. Note that in several years in this decade, this series had 2 number one albums. Insane. Very, very, very popular. Also number one albums: Kenny Chesney, George Strait, Faith Hill, Gretchen Wilson. A lot of country, again, which would continue. Nickelback had a number one album. 9 Inch Nails came back with teeth. That's the name of the album. Audioslave had a number one album again. Green Day's album was holding on. I guess they were both holding on. Stained and Disturbed, System of a Down had 2 number one albums. Three Doors Down had a number one album. Coldplay Dave Matthews Band, again, had a number one album. Has there been a year in the 2000s when Dave Matthews albums didn't hit number one? I don't think yet. Maybe the first one? I don't know. Bruce Springsteen had another number one album. Rob Thomas had a number one album. Ray Charles' final album, Posthumous, was number one, partly because of Jamie Foxx's movie. Madonna, Confessions on the Dance Floor, number one. Ashley Simpson, Hilary Duff, Alicia Keys, Mariah Carey, Mimi, number one. It was a comeback for her in a lot of ways. She has not needed to come back, really, since then. Destiny Child, number ones. So I guess, the compilation was a number one album. Omarion's debut, I believe it was called O. I don't know. That might have been following it. R. Kelly, Tupac, posthumously. Eminem, again. The Game. Paul Wall, Kanye's great second album. And the winner, again, for number one album of the year, 50 Cent with The Massacre. My God, I need another drink. That's a lot of stuff. Some notable debuts, again, ton of them, though still not as much as 2001. So another dip here. Again, 2001 wasn't the most ever. That's actually coming soon. I'm not going to mention all the indie bands who made a mark in 05 because indie rock was exploding, even more so than in 2001. But I'm going to mention a few. Block Party, Silent Alarm, absolutely huge for me anyway, and probably my tops for the year of 2005. I still refer to it so often. If you don't know it, look it up. What an amazing debut. The Rakes, The Bravery, The Click Five. So there's still the trend of bands starting with the. Clap Your Hands, Say Yeah, Tapes and Tapes, Hard-Fi, stars of CCTV, just like that title. Kaiser Chiefs, Baby Shambles, August Burns Red, Paramore debuted in 05, Grace Potter and the Nocturnals, Brandy Carlisle debuted in 05, Miranda Lambert, Carrie Underwood, so some more country, a lot of women this year. Amos Lee, Panic at the Disco, LCD Sound System, which was huge for me. Deadmau5 debuted in 05, Macklemore in 05, The Perceptionists, great hip-hop duo, I believe. I have it. Plus, note about so many hip-hop groups, more than one person. That was it's been around since the beginning of hip-hop, but it was a big trend in the 2000s. There were a lot of singular hip-hop people, Ludacris and T.I., and people we'll get to, but there were a lot of groups as well that made it to number one even. More debuts. The Game, Trey Songz, Chamillionaire, Gucci Mane, Chris Brown debuted in 05. Mia, I auditioned for her new album. She wanted a voiceover, British voiceover, and I just recently did an audition for Mia. I haven't heard back, but who knows? Rihanna debuted in 05. Some other notable releases. Sleater Kinney's The Woods. Again, all through this decade, Sleater Kinney just dominated. Rock, female rock, whatever you want to call it, underground rock. They were, and I'm glad that they're back. Fiona Apple's Extraordinary Machine. Mary J. Blige's The Breakthrough. Missy Elliott kept releasing amazing albums. I've said it before. Common's B. The music is as interesting as the title. Fort Minor, The Rising Tide. I love that album. It's the dude from Linkin Park, and I just loved that album. Wish they had done more. I really liked the sound of that album. Gorillaz Demon Days was in 05. Depeche Mode, Playing the Angel. Death Cab for Cutie Plans. What a great album. Sigur Ros's Talk, I want to say, parentheses, was my favorite and Talk my second favorite, but I don't remember a lot. Dove Some Cities, worthy follow-up to the last broadcast. Foo Fighters In Your Honor. Good album. Avenged Sevenfold, City of Evil. White Stripes, Get Behind Me, Satan. So that's two references to evil. Chaos and Creation in the Backyard by McCartney, one of his best. Spoon, Gimme Spoon dominated in the 2000s too. And Gimme Fiction was a good album. My Morning Jacket's album Z, which is this is the sound I make when I listen to My Morning Jacket. Just a coincidence. Bright Eyes, I'm Wide Awake It's Morning. I loved that album. Again, Sufjan Stevens, Illinois. Anthony and the Johnsons, I Am a Bird Now. Anthony is now an Anthony now. So 2006, here it comes. I'm sorry in advance. First of all, 2006, absolute peak of major label or whatever, any label, period, releases. The peak of releases in the entire history of music was 2006. Again, does that include the internet age and people releasing things themselves? No, of course not. But as far as the companies of any size releasing anything, the peak was 2006. It was the mega top-heavy expansion before the industry fully and not very slowly deflated and collapsed and tried to change its model and didn't do it quickly enough. And now we're stuck with a fractured model where they're making their own back-end deals with places like Spotify, and only the strongest tend to survive. More debuts than any year in history before or since, and more number one albums than any year previous to 2006, although, again, not the top. And again, a lot of these lists don't take into consideration independent releases because that's not the kind of research I can do on this budget. Patreon.com/music is not a genre. If you would like me to do that kind of research in season 7, not that I don't research these for hours and write them, but I do. Independent releases, of course, have been bigger than ever in the last 10 plus years, but there were a lot of independent releases back then. I know because I did them. There were a lot of debuts of indie bands that never hit big but continued to thrive and define indie for the next 10 to 20 years. And it happened in 2006. It was a continued fracturing of the industry and people's tastes. The plus side of which, again, incredible diversity on and off the charts. The minus was this may be the year. Why I have been warning you about 2006. It may be the year that the currently hyper-divided state of the country finally exploded like acne. It had started way before then, subtly and behind the scenes in the 60s and beyond, but publicly in the 90s with Newt Gingrich and all that stuff. But as far as it just finally starting to fully take hold at the top and bottom and middle of the culture, I think 2006 is a real watershed moment of that. The head-whipping weirdness of the list of number one albums is a great place to start to illustrate how crazy 2006 was. Top albums of the year, there were 40 albums that made it to number one. Please give me strength. I've got to get through this. And that's not the most albums in a year making it to number one. We haven't gotten there yet. We won't. Not in the 2000s. That happens much later. But I think the most in the 2000s was this year. Again, 2006, screw you, man. The most, close to the most, though, in any given year. It's honestly more surprising what albums made it to the top in this year than maybe any year ever in history, because it is an incredibly long and diverse and unusual list with old and new artists and all over the place in terms of genre. Pretty fun. Of course, starting with the most diverse genre albums. Now, that's what I call music. Number 22 and 23. Both made number one. 23 was that series' 10th number one album. I don't know how many bands, period, or anybody had that many number one albums. I'm sure some had more. Hannah Montana soundtrack made it to number one, as did the High School Musical soundtrack. Il Divo, those fun dudes. Barry Manilow had a number one album, as did Rod Stewart, Johnny Cash's American 5, Bob Dylan, so older artists, Jack Johnson and Friends, a kid's album, Godsmack, another number one, Tool, Incubus, AFI's December Underground, maybe my favorite, don't remember. Red Hot Chili Pepper Stadium Arcadium double album, amazing, number one. Prince's 3121, nice follow-up to Musicology. Timberlake had another number one album. Neo's debut was number one. Jamie Foxx's second album made it to number one, again on the heels of that movie and his popularity and Ray Charles and all. Jaheim, Mary J. Blige, Beyonce, LaToya, not LaToya, the debut of LaToya. There are quite a few artists, and I've said this even in the 80s and 90s, I never heard of. And they had number one freaking albums, so they sold hundreds of thousands of albums. Never heard of LaToya. India Arie had another number one. Christina Aguilera, Ciara, Nelly Furtado, Danity Kane's debut, number one, female group. Juvenile, T.I., Rick Ross's debut, Ludacris, P. Diddy, The Game, Jay-Z, Young Jeezy, Busta Rhymes, all number one albums. Evanescence, number one album. The Chicks, Rascal, of course known as the Dixie Chicks then, Rascal Flatts. It was hard to tell who was the winner for the year as the most dominant album, but it seemed like Rascal Flatts, numbers-wise, topped them. Now, of course, these numbers are always concurrent with the year I'm talking about. Since then, it's not fair to judge, this album, like the number one album in, 84 might not have been Prince or Michael Jackson in terms of sales then, but it is now or whatever. I'm just making something up. It's not fair to judge it that way. What happened in that year is what I'm going for, and from what I can see, I think it was Rascal Flatts. Notable debuts. I'm sorry to say that there were 630 label debuts in 2006, more than any year before or since, as I said. I'm not gonna mention even a fraction of them. You can often tell what the industry and other people were thinking by what debuted. What did they buy? What did they release? And with a year like this that had so many debuts, but so few that really hit and lasted. In fact, I think the ratio, or whatever you want to call it, the relationship between number of debuts and number of debuts that made an impact ever is that's the largest. It's sort of like income inequality. It's the largest. And 06, again, it's just a sick year. Screw you, 06. But a handful of those would end up defining the 2010s. Lots of second-tier indie, punk, emo, metal bands from all over, but especially the US and the UK. I think we talked about like the British invasion waves. So you had the 60s and somewhat in the 70s. You had a big one in the early 80s. And then you had the whole like Britpop in the 90s. There was another wave in the 2000s. It just keeps happening. Still worthy to look up. I'm not going to mention a lot of those bands. Here are a few of those indie bands. Beach House, The Fratellis, Frightened Rabbit, She Wants Revenge, one of my faves, Rock Kills Kid, Cold War Kids, Cute Is What We Aim For, Portugal, Period, The Man, whatever, and a bunch of other, Arctic Monkeys, one of the best of the year. That's just a fraction of the indie bands that debuted in 06. Eric Church, Kareem Bailey Ray, debuted in 06. Jonas Brothers' first album. Fergie's first solo album. Pharrell's first solo. DJ Khaled, Lupe Fiasco, Wiz Khalifa. Plan B debuted. Now, I don't know anything about Plan B other than when I was naming the band Wreck, the list of 30 names included Plan B. I've always liked it. And this was in 04. Plan B, the artist, already existed, which I found out on the internet, and said, nope, can't be that, and that's why I mentioned Plan B. Debuted album-wise in 06. Gnarls Barkley, Aloe Black, debuted in 06. Taylor Swift's first album was in 06, and for those of you just listening, the shirt I'm wearing, the Wombats' debut album, not major label, but their debut album, 06. Please look up the Wombats. They're an amazing band. Other notable releases in 06. Look, I'm not saying 06 was a terrible year for music. It wasn't. Like 03 was pretty lame. But 06 was just a weird, just insane year. The chaos was evident everywhere. But that means there were also some really great releases, such as Amy Winehouse's Back to Black, Regina Spektor's Begin to Hope, Joanna Newsom, YS, yes, I guess, Tom York's solo, The Eraser, which I really enjoyed. TV on the Radio, Return to Cookie Mountain, probably their best. Hot Chip, The Warning. Hot Chip had a lot of good albums in the 2000s. Mastodon, Blood Mountain, yet again putting out something good. My Chemical Romance, The Black Parade, tops for them probably. Jay Dilla's Donuts, so influential. Nas, Hip Hop is Dead. The Roots, Game Theory. And the Beatles' Love. All great releases in 2006. Which brings me to 07. Last year I'm going to do, or part of it before the break. It's another insane year. In fact, because it's another insane year, and I don't want to get away from myself and you here, and 06 was exhausting, I'm going to change my mind here and take the break now. Give you a chance to catch your breath so I can catch my breath, and we will come back after the break with 2007. Hey, so I was going to do the usual and just list all of the links that I'd love for you to check out, but I realized that everything you need to know and everywhere you need to go is at nickdimatteo.com. That really is the hub. I list all the links in every episode just in case, but nickdimatteo.com is where I put everything that I do. If you want to know more about this podcast, whether it's the audio version or the YouTube version at youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre or wherever else the podcast shows up, or if you want to support the podcast at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre, just go to nickdimatteo.com. It's all there. If you want to check out my full discography of original music and covers for my band REC, REC, and beyond, it's at nickdimatteo.com, including all the streaming and social links for wherever you listen to music and wherever you check out your soch. My acting clips are there. My voiceover clips are there. Graphic design, my blog, and most especially, it's the best place to contact me. If you go to nickdimatteo.com/contact or just hit the contact is on every single page, you can send me a note, say hello, ask me any questions you'd like. You get a newsletter a few times a month, and if you have a project of your own and need work done for it, whether it's audio editing or music or voiceover or graphic design, or if you have an event and you need live music, go to nickdimatteo.com, contact me, say hello, let me know what you need. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the show. Okay, we're back. I hope you took a bathroom break or whatever and got your rest because, that was insane. Unfortunately, 2007 was another insane year. Or fortunately, however you want to see it. Lots of repeat appearances, so we were hitting a certain stride. It was chaos, but managed chaos, maybe. Lots of older artists. Another clear indication, though, of the fracturing of culture and people still hungry for more of a mix than they were getting from the mainstream radio and other ways that they were consuming music. There were whispers now of the waning of rock dominance. Still up there, but hadn't completely fallen. Honestly, this decade, as I mentioned, it's been invigorating, but really exhausting. The 2000s were more overwhelming to deal with music-wise than any decade, and we're talking about decades like the 70s and 80s, So this was maybe, though, the most lackluster year of the decade, which, considering 2003, is really something to say. And let's see if I'm right about that. I put it down as a note. We'll see if I disprove it or prove it. Top albums of the year. Now that's what I call music. 24 and 25. Again, 2 from this. I think this is the first time. I want to say this is the first time that back-to-back. Yeah, so 22, 23 last year. 24 and 25 in 07. Wow. Some soundtracks. Dreamgirls, High School Musical 2, Hannah Montana 2. First, that's a double album, and the first disc was Hannah Montana, and the second disc of that was Miley Cyrus's debut as an artist aside from Hannah Montana. That was 07. Another number one from Avril Lavigne. That's 3 years in a row, I believe. Another one from Norah Jones. Another one from Josh Groban. The Eagles, Bruce Springsteen, and Bon Jovi all had number one albums in 07. Springsteen was really up there in the early 2000s. Rascal Flatts, yet another number one album in 07, as well as Toby Keith, Tim McGraw, Reba McEntire's duets, Carrie Underwood, a lot of country again. Alicia Keys again. Music Soul Child comes back after a bit of a hiatus or whatever, off the charts anyway, with a number one album. Neo is back. Omarion R. Kelly back. Pretty Ricky, don't know who that is. Kanye back on the charts, as well as Jay-Z, Nas, T.I., T-Pain. I think not back, but on the charts. Biggie's hits on the number one. Common again. UGK, I believe a hip-hop collective or group. Kid Rock, number one album. Linkin Park, Fall Out Boy, number one album. Modest Mouse had a number one album in 2007. Maroon 5, number one. The big winner of the year, Daughtry, had the biggest album of the year. Again, this is why 2007 was one of the most lackluster years of music in that decade. Ultimately, though, Josh Groban's Christmas album, which was number one, would sell more throughout. Notable debuts, again, huge year. Though this is the first year. So 2006 had 630 debuts. That was the peak ever history. Before or since, this is the first year where it started to decline. And the decline was not rapid, but year after year it was steady. and continued through, I don't even know, I think through the last 5 years even maybe. Even fewer debuts made any mark at all. And 2006 was so crap for that. It's amazing that 2007 was worse, including yet more never-known hip-hop artists and indie bands. Again, respect to them. Hope somebody discovers your music, but, nobody knows you. Blow up of TV stars and actors and contest winners making albums. Another blow up of that, which doesn't say a lot of things about the culture, or does actually. Lots more electronic. The wave of electronic just growing, and alternately a wave of quieter music, which a good decade later would define pop, and still to me kind of does. That quiet defines pop more than anything the last 10 years. Some things like that. White Rabbits, Bon Iver, The Bird and the Bee, Colby Calais, Jordan Sparks, St. Vincent debuted in 07, One Republic, Management, MGMT, Calvin Harris, always liked that guy, not as much as Mark Ronson, but still, Swizz Beatz, Sean Kingston, Five Finger Death Punch debuted in 07. Screw them, though, based on what I saw at the Metallica concert. Death Clock, that fake band from the cartoon, put an album out. They just did a movie I haven't seen yet, I think in 2023. Also, in 2007, Wreck debuted. First album, Parts and Labor. We recorded it in 05 and mixed it in 05 and 06 and 07 and released it in 07. It's still one of my favorites. And the featured song from this episode will be off of Parts and Labor. It's the last song that I haven't shared from that album, Rex Parts and Labor. You'll get the links are below, but stick around for the end of the episode as well. Other notable releases in 2007, a great second album from Miranda Lambert, Leona Lewis's Spirit, Mia's Kala, LCD Sound System Sound of Silver, what a great album, Radiohead and Rainbows, also beautiful. Of Montreal, Hissing Fauna, Are You the Destroyer? That's, I think, when Of Montreal really broke out from the Elephant Six, collective. Arcade Fire's Neon Bible, Shins Wincing the Night Away, The National Boxer, Spoon, Ga 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 Ga. Great second album from Arctic Monkeys. Foo Fighters, Echo Silence, Patience, and Grace. Not one of my favorites of theirs, but still a very strong album. But that just shows how, other than, of course, Wreck's debut, 2007 didn't have a whole lot of amazing music. It just didn't. 2008. Similar to the chaos of 2007, but a bit more interesting. Thankfully, things were going in a new direction. Great comebacks, cool debuts. Rock was still charting, but was falling off and kind of more growing under the radar. Again, lots of quieter music bubbling under, but also, contrastingly, lots of metal and more raucous electronic. And then especially international music was just surging year after year. Top albums of 2008. Some soundtracks, Juno, Mamma Mia, Twilight. Okay. Jonas Brothers had a #1 album yet again. Miley Cyrus had a #1 album. Taylor Swift had her first #1 album in 2008. Britney comes back with a #1 album. Beyonce, Sasha Fierce was #1. Janet Jackson, Madonna, Neil Diamond, Mariah Carey all have #1 albums. So did Mary J. Blige. Danity Kane yet again. I can't name a song of theirs. Day 26's debut album, don't know who that is, went to #1. So did Usher. Lil Wayne's The Carter 3, iconic at this point, as well as Nas. Kanye's 808s and Heartbreaks, T.I., Rick Ross, Young Jeezy, all #1 albums. Kenny Chesney, George Strait, Alan Jackson, Sugarland all had #1 albums. It's great variety, though. You got to be honest, all over. Also, AC/DC, Metallica's Death Magnetic. Just saw it on the shelves behind me. Slipknot, Disturbed. Again, Three Doors Down. This is like their third #1 album. Coincidence? I think not. Radiohead, Coldplay, Death Cab for Cutie all had #1 albums. So did Jack Johnson, Josh Groban, Leona Lewis. And the top #1 album of the year was Alicia Keys' album. I think As I Am. Was it that one? I think it might have been that one. Notable debuts for 2008. Flo Rida, Shwazy, The Nux, hip-hop group. I mentioned them because I have that CD. Straight No Chaser, so another kind of retro band. Hadn't seen that kind of retro music since the mid-90s, maybe. Lady Antebellum, look them up. You'll get a lot of stories there. That was a debut in 08. Kurt Vile from Philly. Vampire Weekend. Love-hate with them. The Airborne Toxic Event. Cage the Elephant. School of Seven Bells. Waves. Really like. Foals. Fleet Foxes. I love Fleet Foxes, or I did at the time. Flight of the Conchords. Fake band. Again, from New Zealand, right? Crystal Castles. She and Him, Owl City, underrated, I think. Carly Rae Jepsen's debut was in 08. Demi Lovato, 08. So definitely more interesting than 06 or 07. Jennifer Hudson in 08. Santi Gold, or Santo Gold as she was known. Lady Hawk. Adele's debut in 2008, the album 19. Another small debut in 2008 was Lady Gaga. So, yeah, definitely trumps 07 and 06. Some other notable releases. Guns N' Roses' Chinese Democracy. We all waited. But it shows you how meh the end of the decade was. A lot of expectation and disappointing delivery. Not across the board, but in a lot of ways. And Chinese Democracy definitely fills that. The Killer's Day and Age was a great one. No Age, Nouns. I have that. That's kind of noise rocky, post-punk. Kings of Leon, Only by the Night. Erykah Badu, New America Part 1, Fourth World War. Now, listen. This was 2008. And I just mentioned, let me count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 albums that were notable. Other than the debuts, and not that many debuts. Now, that's actually even less than 2007. There was just some stuff happening towards the end of the decade. It just wasn't gelling the way it was in 01 or 04, which were great years. 2009, final year of the decade, was the first time in many years that we start to see any consensus at all forming. The chaos of that decade was starting to settle, not completely, but to a degree, just a little. Fairly decent mix of old and new, hip-hop and pop and rock, country. There were some indications where music would go in the 2010s, such as the greater influx of international music, the sort of official start of, or unofficial start of the mashup era, yet more electronic music. It had already started to push rock back into the underground, and the waning interest in albums in favor of singles, which, yes, bonus MxTRA video, patreon.com/music is not a genre. I talk about that singles destroy music. Top albums from 2009. I'll give you a pause. Can anybody guess the name of the first 2 albums I'm going to mention as number 1 albums in 2009? Answer? Now that's what I call music. 30 and 31. Now, I haven't done the 2010s yet. I'm going to guess that in the early part of the 2010s, these albums still chart, and then they disappear. That's what I'm going to guess. But man, the 2000s, this had to be, 14 or 16 number 1s from that series? That's insane. They were great, though, because they were both hanging on to the past, because they were a true mix of styles, unlike what was happening in the radio and other things at that time. And they were a shade of the future because they prized singles over albums, which, again, bonus MxTRA video. It's interesting how that was the case. There have been those kind of albums for decades. Singles, compilations, best of a year, whatever, best of a certain genre. But the dominance of them, that so many of them hit number 1, it just tells you something about where the culture was going at the time. Other number 1 albums. Hannah Montana movie soundtrack. Jonas Brothers had another number 1 album. I think that's their 3rd. Susan Boyle, contest person. Michael Bublé, Kelly Clarkson, Demi Lovato, Colby Calais, all had number 1 albums. So did Barbra Streisand, Whitney Houston. Michael Jackson's first posthumous album went to number 1. Also, Bruce Springsteen and Dylan had number 1s. U2's No Line on the Horizon, a great album, went to number 1. As did Bon Jovi's album. Pearl Jam's Backspacer. They hadn't had a number 1, I think, since Riot Act. So that's pretty good. Or was that number? I think so. Green Day's 21st Century Breakdown, their follow-up to American Idiot, worthy follow-up. Dave Matthews, another number 1. I don't know if anybody's counting at home. Is that like 6? or 7 times I've mentioned Dave Matthews in this decade? Why don't I remember any of that? Daughtry had another number 1. The Fray, John Mayer, Black Eyed Peas, Chrisette Michele, you tell me who she is. Maxwell had another number 1. Fabulous, Jay-Z, Eminem, Rick Ross, all number 1 albums. Keith Urban, George Strait, Rascal Flatts, Sugarland, Carrie Underwood, Reba McEntire, all number 1s. But the number 1 album of the year was Taylor Swift in 2009. And that would happen so many years since then. Some notable debuts. Interesting that there was almost no significant hip-hop that debuted. I think I mentioned this in hip-hop production in that episode, how the popularity of hip-hop was waning towards the end of the 2000s in through the 2010s. And then in the mid-2010s, it started to pick up again. And that period gave hip-hop a chance to do interesting things underground that would then resurge and never let go. And I think by 2017, it was the most sold music ever, or something like that. It finally trumped every other kind of music. Ironically, during the Trump era. Almost no significant hip hop in 2009. And I think it's because by this point, a lot of it was being released on SoundCloud or as mixtapes, self-releases, right? So the only one I'm going to mention as a notable debut is Kid Cudi, who has done great things. But a lot of it, not major labels. So you can tell me, if you look it up, were there independent releases in 2009 from hip-hop artists that would then start amazing careers? Probably. Glee, Volume 1, debuted. That, to me, is the start of it. If you remember Glee, one of the significant things about it was that it would take 2 songs that were different and put them together and create something new, the mashup. So that's why I say it's like the unofficial start of that. Selena Gomez and The Scene, the band she had, that's a debut. The Lonely Island, those jokers. Mumford & Sons debuted in 2009, as did Hot Shell Ray, 21 Pilots, Japan Droids, one of my favorites. White Lies, Florence and the Machine in 2009. The XX, Tune Yards, La Rue, which has put out some interesting things since then. Neon Indian, LMFAO. That's clear internet culture there. Major Lazer, which was Diplo and Switch's group, and The Matrix, the production team, put out their first standalone in 2009. Other notable releases, another notable from Mastodon, just dominating, Crack the Sky. Suns, Monoliths, and Dimensions. It's considered really good. Paramore, Brand New Eyes. Animal Collective, Merriweather Post Pavilion, which is on that other shelf. St. Vincent, Actor, just continuing to roll. Bon Iver's Blood Bank, so real roll for that person. Phoenix's Wolfgang Amadeus Phoenix was really big that year. MF Doom's Born Like This, and Most Def's The Ecstatic, which I have and still freaking love. That's the last year of the 2000s, in case you were wondering. Yeah. Conclusions. Controversial maybe, I don't know. Though great rock albums have been made since the 2000s. That is absolutely true. I've made a few of them. No, I don't say I believe it. I'd be hard-pressed to name any album that would rise to the level that rock albums did in the 90s and the 2000s. Now, I want to be proven wrong. I want to remember things I've forgotten, or have one of you say, oh, there was a rock album in 2015 that's better than anything I've heard in the last 20. I want to be proven wrong. But rock hasn't dominated in the way that it did, the last time it really dominated was maybe a little bit of the 2010s, and that's pretty much it. Is it coming back? Yes. Does it matter overall? No, because it's always there in some way. And who's on top doesn't make a difference. People listen to whatever they want to. And the fact that hip hop or electronic or pop or whatever else is on top is country, totally fine thing and a wonderful thing. But if you're a fan of rock music, it's interesting to see the ups and downs, just in the way I described the ups and downs of hip hop music in that episode. The twin forces of the digital music format surge and the singles culture returning very quick, returning from its time, high heyday, let's say in the 60s and maybe a little bit in the 80s, pushed the 2000s from what was an echo or continuation of the 1990s, an album culture and prior, to complete fractured chaos and barely a shade of the previous world by the end of the 2000s. Maybe the most transitional decade in music ever. I don't know. A part of the fracturing was, of course, the healthy opening up of music interest from other cultures and backgrounds and from more independent artists and things like that, which, of course, would only grow. And that's one main reason rock started to decline, because not everybody's into it. It's just true. They more aggressively, the 2000s, straddled the pre-internet and internet eras, as I mentioned before. Regardless of the internet becoming a force to a degree in the 1990s, it was still barely present. Anybody who lived through it just was like, some people used it, some didn't. In the 2000s, some people used the internet, some didn't. Some people still didn't have like PCs, personal, whatever. Some people didn't trust the internet as far as credit cards and sales and things like that. The 2000s were a mixed up decade and were very transitional. The old new worlds coexisted. But by the end, the old world was pretty much gone. For so many reasons. The chaos did breed some incredible music and absolutely incredible diversity. Again, largely because of the international music scene, partly because of the exposure the internet gave to international music, and also because singles becoming more important. Bonus MxTRA video, did singles destroy music? Patreon.com/music is not a genre. The second half of the decade was increasingly dominated by artists who were much better known for their singles. Hot Shell Ray, Carly Rae Jepsen, even a bunch of the rock bands like Three Doors Down, I don't know, were more known for great singles rather than great albums. I'll go more into that in my bonus video. It's what I've been saying. And so for all those reasons, the 2000s, chaos, transition, just insane. Interesting that, McCartney's best album of the decade was Chaos and Creation in the Backyard. So it was present. It was really present. Featured song is a song by my band Wreck from Parts and Labor from 2007 called Just About to Die. It's the last song from that album that I haven't shared. Early note that I mentioned that quieter, more ambient music was coming throughout that decade, even a little bit in the late 90s. This is me doing that kind of music to a degree, but still clinging to some of the 90s, early O's sound and production. So really mixing the two, because I love to mix things. And also Just About to Die, kind of a fitting title considering what I said about the death of albums and the death of the pre-internet culture. Kind of, dead on timing-wise, didn't know it. The lyrics were about a crisis in my relationship at the time, thinking that it was about to end. So that's the Just About to Die. And trying to find ways to make it work that would continue for a few more years, and then it did end. So an interesting song to revisit, as many songs are. And I hope you stick around. In about a minute or so, you get to hear that. And, of course, links to where you can stream it, to Bandcamp and all that stuff. What are your favorite albums from the last half of the 2000s? Love this question. Did you listen to them mostly on CDs still or as downloads? I did both, but mostly CDs. I made a lot of compilations from downloaded music, pirated music, let's be frank, onto CDs. So it was that weird time where it was like, okay, here are MP3s, but I'm going to listen to it on a CD because I didn't want to bother with loading it onto an MP3 player, blah, blah, blah. I could play the CD in the car, etc. How did you handle that pretty rapid switch from physical music to digital music? I want to know your answers to all these and everything else because, as always, my objectives are music conversation and connection. The 2000s are over. So is this episode. Stick around for the featured song, and I will talk to you next week.
Really scared me there for a second. I took a breath and lost it for a second. Had me going, had me going. life every second.